My fellow citizens of all nations. Summary of Zadig or Destiny by Voltaire. Zadig is a man from a Babylon. He is a young man, he is not married yet, he has no family. And he lives in Babylon and has a higher position. Now, he doesn't have a super high position within Babylon, but we can look at it as someone from a middle class. Basically, he is not poor. He's sort of an aristocrat. And he faces a lot of suffering, a lot of bizarre situations in his life, basically. Now, we can divide Zadik's life basically in couple parts. First would be his life in Babylon. Second part would be how he is forced to run away from Babylon, and later how he returns in Babylon again. So let's start right now from his story, the first part basically, how he lives in Babylon and what is the situation that happens to him there. Now, first of all, he is wounded because he tries to protect his fiancee, because another man was jealous of him, and that man found Zadik's fiancee very attractive and wanted to take her away for himself. Basically, Zadig protects him, and his fiancée begs her, by the way, during the situation, to Zadig, please protect me, my love, I love you so much, I have so much feeling toward you, save me from these brutes that are trying to kidnap me. And Zadig fights very hard with his slaves, basically, and saves this woman. And what happens is very interesting, that his eye basically gets injured. And basically, and when the greatest doctor in Babylon is basically summoned, and he says, this is the greatest doctor, by the way, most respected doctor in Babylon, he says something like this. Basically, if it has been the right eye, I would have been able to cure it, but since it's the left eye, then because of that, I am unable to basically cure Zadig. Basically, this fiancé of Zadig announces in front of entire Babylon that he cannot marry an ugly man that has lost his one eye. Basically, he cannot marry. She cannot marry a man that has only one eye. And she marries that man that tried to kidnap him, basically. And that man, who basically is the reason why Zadig is injured in the first place. Well, this thing happens. Obviously, Zadig becomes very depressed out of this experience. Imagine something like this happening to you. How would you feel? But later, what happens is that Zadig's eye basically gets cured naturally, and this great doctor later comes back and says that basically checks the Zadig and finds that he got cured. So he has both of his eyes. He's not the man with one eye right now. He's cured. But he's still depressed. But this doctor, this greatest doctor in Babylon, goes and writes entire series of books why Zadik's eye should not have been cured. And there is cynically mentioned that Zadig never read that books, and it's just whatever left that in past. And after that, basically, Zadig decides to marry, and he marries a woman from basically not from aristocrat circle. Basically, she has a lower status than him and is not rich, basically. And their marriage for first months is a honeymoon period, and etc. And next month becomes bitter, and later this woman starts to behave very strangely, and Zadig has doubts about her sincerity, basically. And he decides to provide a test and asks his best friend to do certain thing with him. Basically, he pretends that he is dead, and his best friend, basically tries to seduce her right now, and pretends that the only way for him, he has some sort of a disease, and for him to be cured, he needs dead man's nose. And basically, this woman gets seduced by this trick, and she actually decides to cut Zadik's nose because of her lover, basically, which is Zadik's friend. Now, obviously, Zadig exposes this whole thing, and basically, after that, basically, he was forced to divorce her because for them to live together became impossible. Obviously, he done such a trick to her, etc. And also, her actions were not so morally commendable, basically. And this entire test thing started because she criticized some woman that was determined to do anything for his dead husband. But whatever, basically, their life together became impossible, and they decided to divorce. And now later, we are in still Babylon. Basically, Zadig is almost basically has a bad situation with justice system twice. First time because basically I think it was Queen's servant that basically Queen lost her horse or something, and some little dog maybe, I don't know what that creature is. And basically Zadig is a very curious, he's a kind of philosophical man, and when man comes and asks him, did you see this creature, horse or whatever, Zadig asks additional questions, basically. How was that horse, how, etc., etc. Basically, he asks very detailed questions about the horse or this animal. And this person has suspicions that Zadig kind of saw this creature or stole it and just doesn't want to reveal it, so he has a problem with court because of that. And honestly, he just realized the situations based on a footprint of that creature, or that's how it is understood. And he's just also a very philosophical, curious man, so he asks additional questions. And by the way, when I reading it, I realized that if I were in that servant's shoes, you would also be very suspicious because Zadig indeed behaves and asks very suspicious questions. Like, imagine you are serving someone and that person lost something, and you're just in this Babylon. You are in this ancient Babylon, you're serving the queen. And the queen lost her horse, and you are asking someone, hey, have you saw it? Like, you expect answer yes or no. You don't expect this long philosophical discussion of how this horse looks like, this horse is disease, etc. Like, you just expect the straight answer. And when somebody starts to have dialogue, you'll be obviously suspicious for right reasons. Now, basically, he finds himself in trouble, and he is determined to, next time, if something like that happens, he will just feign innocence. And next time, basically, he actually saw a thief from his window. But when basically people came and asked him, have you saw somebody? He was like, name, based on his first experience. He was like, no, I have not saw anyone. Now, the court basically proves to him that he indeed saw somebody. He didn't saw this thief, but pretending to did not saw him, basically that thief, and he's charged, he's fined because of that. And now he's miserable, he doesn't know what to do. And later he writes a poem, basically, and he decides to throw this poem away. And what is bizarre about this thing is that there's this parrot that finds not parrot, but the man of envy, the man of envy that is envious of the Zadig, basically, and this is how he's mentioned, the man of envy, that is determined to find this poem. And he finds only one half of that poem, and which basically is really insulting toward the sovereign of the nation. And he's very happy and brings it obviously to the king and queen. And now Zadig basically is about to face disaster. And I'm not sure it was, basically he's about to face death because of it, because he's insulting toward sovereign. But I'm not sure whether it was because of this or other trouble he had toward the court. But it is mentioned very ironically that everybody was distraught, especially there. Oh, yes, it was about this case where it was cynically mentioned that basically Zadig's relatives were very distressed because they would only get some like 30% of Zadig's wealth after Zadig's execution, and most part would go to the king, and other part would go to the man of envy as well, 10% or something. Basically, and because of that, Zadig's relatives were very distressed and depressed because they would they would not receive all the wealth of Zadig, which is also a very cynical thing. And now here comes the parrot I mentioned. Basically, parrot flies out, which is king's parrot or something, and that parrot finds the other half. And when they connect this and brings it to the king, and when king and queen basically connect these two parts of this single paper together, they read completely different thing, which is not insulting toward the sovereign at all. And in fact, it's opposite. It praises the sovereign, basically, they immediately summoned Zadig and his friends, because not only Zadig but Zadig's friends also found themselves in huge trouble. Basically, Zadig's friends will also face this execution. And basically, Zadig all the entire this time is very depressed because all the suffering he faced right now ridicule of suffering, and now he wrote such a bad poem that he's almost executed. Basically, and basically, king and queen basically forgive him, and they mention, which they often, that it would have been such a bad thing if we executed such a great man, which is mentioned by Voltaire cynically, obviously. How queen and king think, it is very bizarre. Now, Zadig is a very intelligent man compared to others, basically. And by the way, I forgot to mention a couple disasters that befall to him, but I will mention this. But it won't be necessarily chronological. But it is within the Babylon before he's forced to escape. Now, one time, basically, he becomes this. He receives very high position within the Babylon because of his intelligence, etc. And he serves the court. And all the young ladies are very happy because he is the first one to be this young and in this powerful position of influence, and etc. And all the ladies in the Babylon, young ladies and beautiful ladies of Babylon, are very happy because of that. But once he basically faces disaster, because he basically said the question arose between very learned men of Babylon whether one should eat meat of a griffin or not, because the Zoroaster forbids one to eat the meat of a griffin. And basically, when this entire problem was introduced to Zadig to decide this answer, I was like, well, why should we care, essentially? This creature doesn't even exist, so let's not bother about it. But he almost faces very huge disaster because of that. Now, let's return to the point. He's already on this powerful position within the Babylon. And basically, there is huge schisma between Babylon, basically, within Babylon, because one part thinks that one should enter the temple with the left foot, the other party thinks that one should enter with the right foot in the temple. And this is, by the way, no joking matter. I may be laughing right now, and you may be laughing about this thing. But this is the matter of huge schisma, basically, between... Basically, two powerful factions are there. One considers that one should enter the temple with right foot, the other are with left foot. And this is, by the way, this can be a very serious issue between religion, by the way. Some religions, even today, have this established idea that they should enter with right foot or etc. This is a funny thing, which is very common within religion. And now, when the special day of religious celebration comes, everybody looks at Zadig, how he will behave. And basically, he basically jumps. And that's how he enters the temple. And everybody's angry right now, both factions. And basically, but nobody dares to say anything to him because he's in power, position of power, basically. But he could have just choose one faction, and he would have gained a lot of influence. But he doesn't do that. He's too honest. Now, here's a very interesting thing. Basically, the queen of Babylon falls in love to Zadig, and also Zadig falls in love to the queen. And the thing is that they have no affair or nothing because Zadig is has such high moral, and he just cannot betray the sovereign, the king, and cannot have this relationship with the queen. He cannot do it. And queen is also a kind of weird character. And basically, they have the meetings, but they never... Basically, they realize that they have some sort of special feelings to each other, but they don't dare, because both of them are kind of traditional and faithful. Now, what happens is that the king has a lot of useless habits, and basically, king is useless, not a very smart person, etc. And the thing about king is that he's a very jealous person. And now king becomes very jealous, and he starts to imagine things that are there, and even more things that are not even there, basically, in his imagination. Usually people tend to go wild in their imagination, right? And he imagines that, now this is not the exact example, but things like that, my wife is wearing a blue shoes, and Sadik is wearing a blue shirt. They must have an affair. This is his logic, basically, this bizarre thing. And basically, Zadig once got basically drunk, and he reveals his feelings toward the queen to his friend. And now, I believe the man of envy also hears about it, and there is also a woman of envy mentioned, which is interestingly wife of man of envy. Basically, they are together, and she also has a feeling toward Zadig. And when once Zadig basically picks a veil or something that she purposely, you know, she basically throws it away on the floor on purpose, and Zadig picks it for him, for her, and she starts to imagine things that basically she starts to imagine things that are not there, and romantic stuff. And by the way, some ladies even suspected that Zadig is kind of gay because he refuses to sleep with anyone, or he has special taste in, basically, because a lot of beautiful ladies throw themselves to him, but he refuses because in reality he is in love to the queen, and that's why he refuses them. But they suspect them, basically, him to have different taste, basically. And now, jealous king decides to basically kill the Zadig and poison the queen. But there is this mute that cannot speak, but he's very good at painting, and he loves queen and Zadig very much, and he paints this thing where Zadig is killed and etc. basically, because king orders that there's their execution, and Zadig is forced to run away, and basically Zadig's friend helps him to run away, and basically he leaves, and they run, obviously. Now, there is a very interesting situation when they run. Basically, Zadig obviously faces a lot of misfortune, and I'm not going to go into such detail about the types of misfortune. But obviously, and I will mention a couple of very interesting things, obviously. Basically, we are on the second part right now, there when he leaves the Babylon, he's on run. Basically, there's a couple of very interesting things. Basically, he finds himself to be a slave of a Sadok, if I remember his name correctly. Let me check it here. Yes, Sadok was his name, basically. Basically, he finds himself as a slave of Sadok in Arabia, and basically he becomes very useful for Sadok, and basically he's very happy that Sadok doesn't have a wife. Now, very interesting thing is that in Arabia during that time was a custom, basically, that if if woman lost a husband, she had to wear all the beautiful jewelries and wealth she has, and to burn herself alive. Now, what happens there is that Zadig finds about this bizarre thing, and he's obviously like shocked, and he wants to change this crazy custom. Like, there is no need why beautiful women need to burn themselves, basically. And he has already a friend of Sadok, and he's not really a slave, because he became kind of friend of Sadok. Basically, and there is this beautiful woman whose name I forgot, and basically she decides to burn herself, and Zadig decides to talk to her, and he's like, "Why are you burning yourself?" And she's like, "Do you love your husband?" or something like that. And I hated my husband, he was brute, and etc. And basically he asks more questions, "Why are you burning yourself?" And she's like, "Well, because this is a tradition. This is a type of tradition and custom we have in Arabia." And Zadig is like, "That's bizarre." And what happens is that she's obviously a young, beautiful lady, and Zadig asks, like, right now, if you were not burning yourself, what you would do? And she's like, "I would probably marry you." Basically, and a couple hours pass, basically, I think 1 hour or something. Basically, once she talks to this beautiful Zadig, which is also very charming and ambitious, not ambitious, but very interesting person to talk to. Basically, she completely forgot the idea of burning herself, and she starts to enjoy the life, if you know what I mean, as a widow. And also, by the way, this custom was very crazy, because some of these widows may have children, etc., and now they're just dying instead of remarrying or etc. Now it's always bad for tribes and states and etc. And basically, after that, there's a law in Arabia that every woman that becomes a widow and follows this tradition to spend 1 hour with young men. And after that law, no woman burns themselves. And by the way, before that, as many women would burn themselves, as much that tribe was respected before that. But now, after this law, where young widows basically need to spend 1 hour with young men, they changed their mind, if you understand what I mean. And nobody burns themselves. And now there is this, and now Sadok and Zadig go to travel, basically, for the purpose of basically selling stuff. And there is this huge market where everybody gathers from different countries. And there is, by the way, a very bizarre conversation between people of different religions, and how funny this conversation is, because everybody, hey, none of them really agree with each other, and etc. And what type of conversation they have. And basically, Zadig calms them, and there are sun worshippers and etc. And basically, he kind of reconciles them with each other, because if he didn't interfere, it would be a bloody battle, because everybody gets drunk and they argue between whose religion is truth. And he's kind of like, well, we don't worship the sun, but the one that created the sun. This is basically his logic. Well, when it comes to this religion, basically, I don't remember exact details of this conversation, but it's very interesting to read how different religions basically are not on the same page at all. Basically, every religion will declare to you that all the other religions are not true, and only theirs is true. Their God is real and most important God, and others are not, or are less of important than theirs. Now, when Zadig returns from this journey, there is this priest, Balzora. Basically, this Balzora and these priests are the ones that used to make the most money out of this business of burning, when young widows would burn themselves, because obviously when young widows would burn themselves, they would go there and collect that jewels and etc., because they were forced by that custom to will every single wealth, the jewel and etc. they had in their possession. And now they're very angry, and they decide to basically kill Zadig because of it. Now what happens here is very interesting, because obviously Zadig is about to be killed, because essentially he saved hundreds and probably millions of women in generations from burning themselves. But now he angered the priests, obviously, that used to make a lot of profit from that custom. And there is this woman, basically, the first woman I mentioned, which Zadig saved. And she basically is a very attractive woman, and she gets naked and shows her breasts, and she goes to this priest basically and shows her beauty, even though those priests are very old, and charms them, and basically she gets their agreements not to kill Zadig. And basically what happens is that she also calls the court. Even though these priests are old, they drink something to have their manhood stand up for it, because she promises them an affair in evening, basically, when night comes or something. And I don't remember the exact time, but she basically invites these 4 priests at the same time with her. And she also calls the judges. And obviously when judges see this thing, they forgive Zadig. And basically she saves Zadig. And when Sadik heard about it, obviously Zadik's friend, he makes this woman, which Zadig first of all saved from burning herself, because now she's true friend and follower of Zadig, because he basically saved her, and she basically experienced all the pleasure of life and etc. And basically Sadik is so thankful of her for saving Zadig, that basically he makes this woman his first wife. And have in mind that Zadig is still in love to the queen of Babylon. Now, after that, basically they go on their way, and what happens is that basically Zadig finds himself on the way to Babylon. And what happens is that basically he meets the queen of Babylon, and basically he helps her, and she is returned to Babylon. And by the way, he finds out that the king is killed basically, and Babylon fell by neighboring princess Shems or something like that. Basically Babylon lost the war, but later they revolt and they regain their freedom. And now what happens there is very interesting thing, because Zadig finds the queen, and now I'm trying to find the name of the queen. Okay, I will find it somewhere here. Basically, it doesn't matter what really her name is, but the point is that Zadig saves basically the queen from this, from slavery, and the queen returned to her power. And now Babylonians want to find a king, and they arrange this competition. And this competition, obviously, queen gives Zadig also took part, and basically he has a white armor, and his main opponent has green armor. And now there is this cynical thing mentioned. The two champions, and they have competition power, obviously, they fight. They made such agile runs and turns, exchanging such expert blows of their lance, and were so secure in the saddle that everyone, apart from the queen, wished Babylon could have two kings. Everyone apart from the queen wished Babylon could have two kings. Now, interestingly enough, Zadig wins this challenge, but basically these men, when Zadig is asleep, steals Zadig's white armor, and have in mind that nobody really saw how they look, their faces, and pretends to be Zadig, basically. And Zadig is very distressed by it. And here is where most interesting two chapters start. Because Zadig is very distressed about life, and he goes on and he meets a hermit. And this is the 18th chapter already. 18, basically last two chapters, chapter 19 and 18 are like very interesting chapters. Because in this chapter 18, Zadig meets this man, and he's a very strange man. Basically, he behaves very bizarre way, and Zadig even calls him a monster. You wicked old man, you promised you'd be more patient. And basically, the hermit explains to him that not everything is the way you see. The hermit basically burns out, steals something, throws somebody in the river, etc. And he explains to him that you promised you'd be patient. It may interest you to know that beneath the ruins of that house which Providence set on fire, its master has discovered a huge hoard of treasure. It may also interest you to know that the young man who's just had his neck wrung by Providence would have murdered his aunt within a year, and you within a two year, basically. And this creature, basically, which is hermit, represented as a hermit, reveals his true nature, and he happens to be an angel with 4 wings. Men, said the angel Jasrad, is the name of this angel, have an opinion on everything and know nothing. You were the one human being who most deserved to be enlightened. Men have an opinion on everything and know nothing. You are the one human being who most deserved to be enlightened. Now, and he also says this interesting thing: there is no evil from which no good comes. And he basically gives this advice to the Sadik, which are very interesting advices. Men thinks that this child who has just perished fell into the water by chance, and that it was likewise by chance that the house burnt down. But there is no such thing as a chance. Everything is either a test or a punishment, a reward or a precaution. It's an interesting way to look at these experiences in your life. Basically, everything is either a test or a punishment, a reward or a precaution. And it's interesting. Everything is either a test or a punishment, a reward or a precaution. Now, now there is this fisherman which angel mentions with Zadig. Remember the fisherman who thought he was the unhappiest man alive? Because that fisherman thought he was the unhappiest man alive, but in fact the Zadig was even more unhappy. And basically, this man right now, the angel leaves for 10th heaven, and he tells Zadig to go to Babylon. Now, now they have intellectual challenge there, which is the second part of that competition to whom, and the winner of this competition will become the basically sovereign of the Babylon and the husband of the queen. And now they have this competition. And there is a very interesting intellectual question. And first question is something like this: which of all things in the world is at once the longest and the shortest, the quickest and the slowest, the most divisible and the most continuous, the most squandered and most regretted, something without which nothing can be done, which obliterates what is small and gives life to what is great? What do you think is the answer to this question? Now, the answer to this question is this. As Zadig answers: nothing is longer, since it is the measure of eternity. Nothing is shorter, since we never have enough in which to carry thought, what we will. Nothing is slower for him who waits. Nothing is quicker for him who enjoys. It stretches, continues, and unbroken into infinity, and it can be divided into the infinitely small. All men waste it. All regret its loss. Nothing can be done without it. It consigns everything unworthy of posterity to oblivion, and it immortalizes that which is great. Now, obviously, let's move on to another question. What is it that we receive without thanks, that we enjoy without knowing how or why, that we give to others when we are having the time of our own, and that we lose without being aware of it? Now, obviously, it's life. And Zadig guessed it also correctly. Now, let's after that, basically, Zadig also proves that he's let's say was that the one with white armor, because he challenges that one that stole his white armor while he was asleep in fight, and he beats him. And basically, he willingly gives up his armor because Zadig threatens him that if he won't give up his white armor, he will kill him. And by the way, he fights and beats him without wearing any armor. And now, at the end, it is mentioned that basically it has a good ending. Basically, Sadok was summoned from deepest Arabia, along with fair Almona. Oh, Almona was that woman's name. Basically, Zadig, the woman that Zadig saved, and later how she saved Zadig. Because Almona is obviously Sadok's wife, to preside over the commercial life of Babylon. To Kador went position and affection to match his service. Kador is his friend that helped Zadig to escape the Babylon. He and the one that basically Zadig told Kador that he had feeling toward Queen. Also, he was the king's friend, basically Kador, and the king was thus the only monarch in the world to have a friend. The little Mut was not forgotten, basically Mut that saved Zadig and Queen. The fisherman was given a fine house. Orkan was required by the court to pay him a large sum of money and to give him back his wife. But the fisherman, now an older and wiser, took just the money. Basically, the fisherman finds himself in huge trouble because of the money. And there is this woman, by the way, that is abused, and Zadig basically saves him when he's on the run, and he kills the one that abuses him, basically. And this queen, by the way, happens to have a very bad character, and later she becomes, by the way, the queen of Babylon, while for a little time, while basically the real Zadig and the actual queen are run. And what happens is that she has such a bad character. Basically, she brings ruin to the kingdom, and she's a very cruel creature generally. And now this is I didn't mention this part, but now all this story has a happy ending, and obviously all this adventure lead us to our beautiful happy ending, basically. And Babylon had the greatest time of prosperity and etc. And it was the happiest time in all of history of humanity. And everybody was praising Zadig, and Zadig was praising the heavens. And don't forget and this is the end. And don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe here on Holiday. See you.